Hi, everybody. I'm Jonathan.
And I'm Molly.
And this is our very first episode of Real Estate Talks, where we talk about real problems, real solutions, and everything real estate related.
We're so happy to have you guys here. As home buyers since 2017, we thought we had a ton of value and insight to share with you guys. And so we wanted to create this channel and just give our all to people like yourself who are looking to sell their home, maybe the non-traditional route, and everything about it. So we're here to answer your questions every Friday of the week.
Every Friday of the week.
Yeah, so
given this is our first episode, we thought we'd start today with talking about what is it really like working with a We Buy Houses company. So Molly, why don't you tell us a little bit about We Buy House companies?
Yes. So if you have, if you ever thought of not working with a realtor, you probably Googled, how to sell my house fast, how to sell my house for cash, or We Buy Houses, right? You may have even searched We Buy Houses in your area, We Buy Houses Chattanooga, We Buy Houses Georgia. And so typically what'll happen is what'll come up is a whole slew of these We Buy Houses companies, right? They're your big franchises, and then they're more so your small mom and pop local owners that buy a lot of inventory in the market. And so what are these companies exactly? Who are they? What do they do? The short and skinny is that they are investors.
That's pretty much what they are. They're investors.
Yeah.
Very similar to our company, right?
Yeah.
They're investors in the marketplace that are looking to provide some sort of value to homeowners on the opposite side of the spectrum of what it may look like to sell a home with an agent, right? Because most people, I think in today's market, when they think about selling a home in any way, or when that thought come to mind, the first thing that they're thinking in a traditional form is, let me go find an agent, right? Whether it's a friend or a family member that they may know. That's really, for the most part, what people think of when they think of selling a home. But what they don't know is that there's this whole other opposite side of the spectrum that can really be a lot more convenient at times, which is essentially working with an off-market buyer or with an investor, right? So I think there's a lot of pros that come with working with an investor versus working with a traditional agent. And I think it really comes down to what your situation is and what your scenario is, right? A lot of the times when you're forced to sell a home, whether it has to do with, some sort of financial distress, maybe you're going through a divorce, or maybe there's been a death in the family, someone passed away that's, causing you to suddenly have to sell the home.
Right.
Or maybe it's a job relocation. That's happening a lot right now, where people are flocking out of states to move to a different state with a lower cost of living, where they got in a new opportunity where they can work.
And they need that flexible timeline.
Exactly, flexible timeline. So, whatever the situation may be, there's obviously some sort of scenario that requires a unique solution. And working with an investor can present that solution. Working with a We Buy House company can custom tailor some sort of solution to whatever you may need to really make it a convenient process. So what are some of those things that you would say an investor can provide that maybe an agent couldn't provide working on the market?
And I've also been licensed, since 2014. So I've worked both spectrums of the market. And, although traditionally we are looking to buy homes direct from sellers, we often do take listings and help sellers sell it on the market. So I know both worlds. But the key differences would be when you're working with a realtor, you're typically like relinquishing control of that transaction. You're saying, hey, real estate agent, go represent me, get me the best offer, put my property out there on the multiple listing service for the world to see in the best light. And you're putting it in their hands, really. And if you're working with a great agent and a great broker, which hopefully you are, you're more of the times in good hands. But regardless, statistics show, when you're listing your home on the market, you are going to have to go through that negotiation process. When you're working with a direct buyer, you're kind of working with one or two people. So typically, you list your property on the market, you prepare it, right? Like the biggest thing is like, how do you get your property ready to go on the market? When you want it to be seen by the world, you want the home to put its best foot forward.
100%.
So
yeah,
you're going to need to spend, you'll need to spend some money, repairing the property. And what do you typically see people getting away with? Like, let's just say their budget's really tight. What do they spend?
I mean, I think, so this is a good point, right? Because this comes back to one of those scenarios of what would cause someone to sell and what would be the benefit of actually working with a home buying company, a We Buy Houses company, or an investor, right? So a lot of the times, and it's not always necessarily this, but a lot of the times, what happens if you just have that home that doesn't look that good, right? That hasn't been touched in 20 to 25 years. Maybe it was a house that mom and dad lived in for the past 30 years. Maybe it was the childhood home that you grew up in that stayed in the family, and someone passed away and now you've inherited it and it's been in the family for 50 years and no one's touched it in 50 years. That is a very hard home to sell on the marketplace today. Why? Because you're going up against a ton of other homes that have been recently renovated. They've had, maybe $30,000 to $50,000 put into it. That upgraded kitchen, new countertops, beautiful backsplash in the kitchen, or new tile in the bathroom. And maybe your home doesn't necessarily look like that. And maybe it's going to cost a lot of money to get it to that place. So what's the alternative solution? That's where an investor can come in. Because when you're working with an investor, they don't really care what the house looks like right now. They're looking at it for what it can become. So the big thing that you'll hear is as is sale, right? Investors are buying homes as is. Why don't you tell us a little bit about what in your mind, when we're talking to these sellers, what as is truly means?
Yeah, you brought something up too, because regardless if your home is in poor condition or not, you can list a home that's outdated, but Jonathan made a good point. You're competing with the market, right? Gone are the days where you just threw any property on the market and you had multiple offers, and no matter what it looked like, right? Nowadays, it's if you're going to be presenting yourself on the market, whether it's a distressed home or not, it's really the key difference is putting it on the market versus direct, right? And so to your question of as is, what we're looking for is really for us, we've seen it all.
Yeah.
I've seen some really scary scenarios that have given me nightmares, and so we've seen some really ugly houses. But for investors and for home buyers, they don't that doesn't phase them the same way as someone who's going to be emotionally attached to the house or moving in or wanting to occupy it. So when we say as is, it's as it comes, right? In its current condition, we aren't going to ask you to lift a finger for repairs. And I think that benefits a lot of people, because if it's a home that you're going to want to move furniture out of, you don't want to deal with that whole process of cleaning things up, repainting it, getting it ready, just even for someone to move in. As investors, we're not looking for that because we're not moving into the property. 90% of the times we have our own crew that's going to come in and clean it up right as soon as you leave. And typically what we tell our sellers is take what's important to you, take your most precious items, whatever matters to you about the house. We've even had a seller ask for a rock. That was a part of
sentimental rock.
So if there's something like that, we tell our sellers, hey, take that, and the rest is up to us. So that's really what as is. And I would go to say 95% of the We Buy Houses companies out there, or investors, they're going to operate the same way.
Pretty much the same way. And just to kind of recap, right? Once again, we're talking about what is a We Buy Houses company, right? We established that typically, for the most part, they're off-market buyers, investors like ourselves that are looking for people like you who may be in a situation where listing the house might not be the best or the most convenient or easiest way for you to sell the home, right? So we talked about what a We Buy Houses company is, or these investor companies that are buying homes. And now we're talking about some of the pros, which is we're buying them as is, right? Meaning you don't have to do any repairs. What would you say another big benefit would be working with a home buying company, or We Buy Houses company? Yeah,
and we'll get into the cons, guys. There are cons, and you have to be careful. So not every We Buy Houses company or home buyer or investor is created equal. But really, I think the second or third biggest benefit would be timeline, right?
Yeah.
Flexibility.
Yeah.
And there's a couple of reasons for that. Number one, they're not looking to move into the house, as we already went over. Number two, they're typically buying in all cash. 95% of the time, they're going to buy in all cash, right? Even if that's a hard money loan, they're coming in as cash. So there is no lender approval. There's no appraisal. And if you've ever sold a property, the appraisal can take anywhere from 7 to 10 days alone.
Or if you bought one.
Or if you buy one. And what happens when that appraisal comes in lower than the offer than you have at the table? The buyer is going to either have to come up with a difference, or you're going to have to reduce your asking price. So as far as timeline, appraisals can really screw up an escrow. We've seen it really, jam up the closing time frame. Buyer remorse, buyers can want to back out during the middle of escrow. Inspections typically, when I was working with buyers and we were going after properties, if you want to be competitive in today's market, you don't want a 21-day inspection contingency, but some buyers will want that. They're moving into the property, they're going to live there with their family, raise their children. Them searching every single part of the house and figuring out what's wrong is their how do you say it? It's what they're looking for, right? That's what they're coming in to your property. They're if it's beautiful and it's updated and it's this gorgeous home, great. They'll come in and they'll feel all the butterflies. But if they see one thing off, that's going to set off a slew of what else is wrong with this house. They're going to bring their inspectors in, and all during their inspection contingency. And if you do or do not know, if something comes up during that inspection contingency, they have the right to come back to you as a seller and say, I want a reduction, or I want you to repair this before we close escrow, which again can hold up the escrow. So cash buyers, why can they be flexible? They're buying it as is. They're not going to do an inspection contingency. If you see an inspection contingency in an offer from an investor, it shouldn't be longer than 7 days or so typically, right? Maybe they have other partners that they want to get in to see it, but typically it shouldn't be that long. Most of the time it's not there. The second part is they're not using a lender, so no appraisal, no waiting for the loan to fund. And sometimes they can even release some of the funds during escrow to allow you.
We've done some pretty creative things. I know that the big thing with working with a home buying company versus listing on the traditional market is that you have a lot more flexibility in regards to what you can provide or what we might be able to provide to a seller. For example, we've had many situations where sellers are living in the home, right? So imagine a situation where you're living in the home, you need to find your next place, or you've already located your next place, or maybe a next place isn't in the question and there's other plans to move in with family members or to move out of town or out of state, whatever it may be. I think the biggest thing is knowing that we're not personally moving into the home, or an investor group isn't personally moving into the home after we close. We have that freedom to be able to give you a little bit of flexibility. So a lot of the times we've set up things where we've allowed sellers to stay in the home for a month or two. We've done things where maybe the seller has, and this actually just happened to us recently, where we had a family that was living in the home. And it was kind of a situation where the family liked to collect a lot of things. They had a couple collectors in the family, and they were very overwhelmed in the idea of having to move everything out, right? And they were in a tough financial bind where it would either take them months to move stuff out, or they would have to spend thousands of dollars to hire a moving crew to help them move the stuff out. So we created a unique situation where we said, hey, we would love to not only buy the house, but release some of the funds that we're using to buy the house to you guys early. So you guys have the money to go move the stuff out. We'll give you plenty of time to do that. And once everything's finished, then we can close. You won't really find those types of buyers or that flexibility when you're working on the market, because ideally the person who's buying your home when you have it listed is someone who wants to move into it. So their owner occupied. Their whole thought is, once we close, we want to get into this house as soon as possible. And that may not work for someone like you, right? That may not work for what your plans may be. So I think a big thing is not only a flexibility in the timeline of which we close, but the other big part that Molly mentioned was the freedom around the contingencies. And without making it too complicated, this is what it is, right? When you buy a home, you have to go get an approval from a lender. The lender has to say, hey, we're willing to give Molly this money to go ahead and buy this home. And the only way that the lender is going to do that is through a series of inspections and appraisals. They need to feel good about Molly buying your home with their money. So sometimes that can get in the way, and sometimes that can stretch out the process. And sometimes you can get all the way till the end for it not to work, just to have to start all over again. And that might not work with your timeline. If you have something coming up in the next month where it's this home needed to be sold a month ago, I can't wait another 2 to 3 months, that maybe that may not be the right route. So, so far we've covered a couple things. We've covered the fact that, number one, an investor's buying it as is, no repairs. Number two, they're flexible around the contingencies, meaning we don't have to go get permission from a bank to buy the house, right? We have our own formulas that we use to come up with an analysis of what we think may be a win-win scenario. And I think the third most important thing is the flexibility as far as timeline. But that's not the only thing that investors can offer as far as pros. What would you say, another thing may be as far as some of the unique things that we've been able to do?
A couple things did come up for me. So like, tenants, right? You're a landlord, you have a tenant occupied property, family members living in the property, like all of those unique and intricate life situations that like affect your lifestyle, right? And what your future goals are. Not everyone has the perfect family, and everyone gets along and everyone's okay with selling the property and everyone's willing to move out. Some people have real life situations, right? Family members are living in there, they need a little extra time. There's so many times where we've closed on the property and dealt with the tenants ourselves. And I think that's a really unique thing, like something that you may not think of. It's like, do they work with tenants? Do they buy properties tenant occupied? And the answer is most of the time, yes, right? We're going to want to see lease agreements. We're going to want to understand like where the tenant is currently. Are they paying? Are they a troublesome tenant? Like, is there government housing involved? We want to know those things. Like if we are going to be the new owners and we're going to inherit that tenant, we want to know what we're dealing with, but we do deal with that. So many of times we've closed prior to the tenant moving out and just took that off of the seller's hand and dealt that ourselves, because that is a big factor for people, right? Like they want their money, they want to move on to the next step. And so home buyers can close and allow you to do that. If you're buying a new home as well, right? Like if you want a solid deal and you want to make sure that you're going to close, like you need to sell, working with a direct home buyer is probably one of your better options. And I'm speaking from experience of like when I was representing sellers and we were listing properties and selling on the market, you're going to get multiple bids, you're going to get the highest price, but the worst part of it is when an offer falls out. For any reason. And then you've got to go back to your backup offers, ideally if you have any, and at that point they're not as hot, right? Let's say 6 weeks or 4 to 6 weeks down the road. Now you've got to go back to your backup buyers and see if there's any interest, or put it back on the market, take it off that pending status. Now you've been on the market for 40 plus days.
That doesn't look good.
So it's, again, like I think the biggest things is like, what are your goals, right? What are you looking to do? What do you need to have come out of the sale of this property?
I agree with that too. And I think, when we're talking about tenants specifically, not every seller is living in the home, right? So a lot of you guys may have a rental property that you may want to sell. And it very much so is circumstantial. Look, we're landlords, we're investors, we have rental properties as well. And we understand that, rental properties can be difficult. Being a landlord can be difficult at times. And having tenants is, sometimes can be an amazing experience and sometimes it could not be an amazing experience. And we've been part of both sides of the spectrum. So we get that sometimes the tenant situation's a little bit sensitive. Sometimes that's the reason why you want to get out of the rental property, right? Maybe you bought this property thinking it was all, sunshine and rainbows, to find out it's not necessarily the business that you wanted to run. It's not the business you wanted to be involved with. And maybe you got a bad tenant that you're now stuck with. We get that. We've been in the same position. So it really is circumstantial. We've seen many situations where we've came in and said, hey, hands off, we'll take care of all of it. We'll take care of the tenant. We'll relocate the tenant, make sure they're taken care of as well, because tenants are real people's real lives too. And we do our best to make sure that we can come up with a win-win solution between the owner, the tenant, and ourselves as well. So with that being said, we buy tenant occupied properties. Working with an investor will allow you to sell a tenant occupied property. Listing a home on the market, not really so. And the reason being, I think most importantly, is that once again, when you're listing a home on the market, you're really going after that owner-occupied buyer group. Like they want to buy the home to move into it, right? So if you have a tenant there, number one, it's difficult to show. You can't do open houses. Number two, if there's any repairs that you want to do before you put it on the market, very tough to do with the tenant there. Number three, and this is my honest opinion, and you might share the same opinion, if you're going to list a house on the market with a tenant inside, you're kind of portraying that it's an investment property.
The buyer pool changes. The buyer pool changes. Like people have, investment properties that they want to put on the market, right? But the buyer pool changes. You're going to have more so investors coming to you. And I think as you were saying that, it's like, okay, well, what's the difference, right? There's like listing it on the market, not listing it on the market, and working with a buyer versus working with an investor buyer versus working with an owner occupant, right? And I think Like at the end of the day, what you need to know about investors is they're looking to make a profit on your property.
Yeah.
So most of the time there is going to be some sort of discount there because they need to buy it at a rate where they can make money. Is it always a lowball offer? Absolutely not, right? Like, they take into consideration the comps, what they can do. Each buyer has their own playbook. So when we talk about like the profit or what are they going to do with the profit, it's an exit strategy. Are they going to flip it? Are they going to continue to hold it as a rental? Are they going to develop on the extra land that's there, maybe make more money out of it? This is what we do, right? This is how we make our bread and butter, by adding value to property and profiting, right? We're not money hungry people, but this is the business that we've chose to be in. And so I think that there's a key thing in knowing what an investor is looking for. Again, it does not always mean that they're going to give you the low ball offer. And I think the last pro would be going into that is like the creative financing aspect.
Yeah, definitely. And that kind of goes back to, sometimes it's not always about selling your home to get a lump sum of cash.
Yeah.
And that goes back to just what Molly was saying right now. So we're also able to come up with creative solutions for our unique scenario. So for example, actually I have a perfect example for this. Kenneth and Kathy.
Yeah.
So we just bought a home. It was about 2.5 months ago from a woman by the name of Kathy and her husband Kenneth. They have a home down in Georgia. Amazing couple that I got to know personally.
Nice.
And they were getting in their 60s and they've done a phenomenal job of accumulating so much real estate with the goal of retiring and them having this real estate to be able to retire from and keep them going, into their 70s and 80s. And essentially they wanted to sell. The reason why Kathy wanted to sell was because Kenneth, her husband, was getting older. He was doing a lot of work on the home. He recently hurt his back and he just didn't, she didn't want to see him having to go out there and do the daily maintenance, the weekly maintenance, the monthly maintenance on the rental properties that they have. So we came up with a unique solution of how we were able to give Kathy and Kenneth pretty close to market value on their home. It was in pretty good condition. And essentially what we were able to do was something called owner financing or seller financing. The terms are kind of mismatched, but essentially, since Kathy and Kenneth had this home paid off, we were able to make them the bank, agree on a price, and make them payments on a monthly basis for the next 10 to 15 years. So now Kathy and Kenneth have been able to take their real estate, sell it to someone like a home buying company, a We Buy Houses company off market, and be able to create an avenue for them to get income every single month without the headaches of toilets and tenants and everything, like being the landlord. And that was amazing. We talk to Kathy all the time. She's ecstatic.
Seems to be going well.
And she gets her check every single month. And her husband are now relaxing and don't have to worry about much anymore.
She basically turned her equity into a mortgage for us, right? And so we pay her every single month. And in that, we take care of the taxes. We pay the taxes every year. We take care of the insurance. We take care of all of your, operating costs on the building, your plumbing, electric. So she just gets her check every month. And I think she loves it, right? And it's still her property at the end of the day. If we don't make our payments, she can foreclose on us. She is the bank, right? She's the mortgage holder at this point. So that is one, I would say one of the things that people don't really think about as far as working with, investors. That's another unique pro. But I feel like we spoke about a lot of pros and we're obviously a bit biased. But I think that there are cons, right?
There definitely is. And just to recap, because I know we've been going on for a while. So we'll go back to what it's like so we covered so far, We Buy Houses company, working with a investor group, working with a home buying group, right? We talked about, what are these home buying groups and what are some of the pros that they offer? We talked about investors being able to buy homes off market, being able to buy them as is, right? Being able to be flexible with the timeline, be flexible with the contingencies, meaning typically we're buying it in cash, so we don't require an appraisal and we don't require any long inspection periods. We also talked about being able to offer creative solutions, right? Maybe it's not necessarily being able to sell the house right now for a lump sum of money, forego taxes, so on and so on. But maybe there's a creative way where I can take this house that I bought 20 years ago and turn it into a bank for the next 20 years. So there's a lot of things or a lot of opportunities that present forward when you're working with an investor. I think the big one overall is when you're working off market, and I can't believe we missed this, you're not working with an agent.
Yeah.
So what are you saving?
Well, we'll break it down, right? Well, what are the fees, okay?
Yeah, realtor commissions.
6% typically, 2 to 3% closing costs.
And then buyer concessions.
And then buyer concessions.
Which are like,
yeah, negotiable.
Buyer, when you list a home, buyer's going to come, they're going to make you an offer, they love the home, the offer looks great, you're ecstatic, and then all of a sudden, the inspector walks through the door. And what's the inspector's job? His job is to make your house, not look like it's the best house in the world and come up with a 50-page report of, this is wrong, this is wrong. I mean, that's their job, right?
Yeah.
So concessions are, after the inspection's done, the buyer may and more than likely will come back and ask you for some sort of discount for repairs because they notice that the electrical outlets on the wall are 2-prong instead of 3-prong.
Small stuff.
Small things.
Small stuff.
Yeah. So you want to be prepared for that.
Yeah. It's typically 10% of the entire transaction, right? So like a lot of sellers, when they think of selling the house with a realtor, they just think about, I'm just going to pay the 6% realtor commission. But you also have to take into account to the 2% closing costs. Typically it's split 50-50 between buyer and seller in most traditional transactions. But I would say anywhere from 8 to 10% off of your purchase price is what is going to come out of your net proceeds. So if your home is $100,000, let's just say $8,000 to $10,000 is going to be taken out of your proceeds once the mortgage is paid off, if there is anything. And you also want to take into account capital gains, taxes. Like, we won't go too deep into that, but speak to your attorney, right? Timeline and the type of offer you're getting may play a role into what your taxes look like.
Yeah, 100%.
So go into cons.
Yeah, I mean, so we talked a lot about pros, and we may seem biased, but we truly believe there are a lot of pros working with a home buying company, but at the same time, there can be some cons. There may be a better opportunity working with an agent on the market. So we'll talk about those.
Yeah. All right. So you were talking about difference between kind of working with a traditional agent and when that would work for people.
Yeah, I think, look, an investor is not always going to be the right fit for someone who wants to sell their home. Investor, home buying company, we buy houses company, whatever you want to call it. Sometimes they're not the right fit for you. And working with an agent may be a better option. So why don't we talk a little bit about when you actually want to work with an agent and when they may be a better fit, because we love agents. Yeah. We work with agents all the time.
I'm a realtor.
She's a realtor, right? And at the end of the day, we buy homes, we fix them up, we put them on the market so we can provide amazing housing to future families who want to move into it and who list our properties. Agents do, right? So why don't you kind of talk about just a few things, and I'll mention a few things that I think as far as working with an agent and when that may be important or be a better option.
Yeah, I definitely think that working with a cash buyer versus realtor, it is solely based on your decision, like what you need to get from the property, your timeline, and just like your end goals. But I think typically, what the clients that I've taken on, they've got, number one, they've got time, right? Like at least 3 to 6 months from start to finish, from listing to closing, right? They've got at least 6 months before they need to be out of the house or onto their next journey. Number one.
Yeah,
time. Number two, they are looking for the absolute highest price possible. Now, again, if you have a distressed property and you list it on the market, you will most likely get investors still, but at least you've got a whole pool of investors that your realtor can negotiate with. So the visibility and being able to present your home to a whole slew of people is a huge bonus of working with an agent. Again, with that, you're gonna have a lot of people come through, so you've got to have the time to go through those people, show your house, and I would say if your house is easily showable, you and your family can leave for every open house. You and your family can leave, or whoever is occupying the property can leave during those showings. That is going to be typically like the ideal seller who wants to put their house on the market, right? If you can't leave every time you need to show the house, or if you've got tenants that aren't going to show the property, you may have trouble actually having it listed on the market.
I 100% agree with that. The way I like to think of it is fundable, financeable, and friendly. And what I really mean by that is if the house is in good enough condition to where someone can move into it with no, like a homeowner can move into it with no issue, and they can get financing on it with no issue, and you have plenty of time to be able to go through that process, then more than likely working with an agent will bring you a higher offer and will net you more money. Now, on the opposite side of the spectrum, you know, if the roof is falling through, or, you know, the floors are caving in, or the walls are bowing in, like these are issues that a lender will see, and then we go back to the issue of not being able to close or not being able to get approval.
Unless you have the time to negotiate back and forth, extend escrow. So if you've got that threshold where, like, you know, maybe my roof is in bad condition or my plumbing is bad, and I'm going to credit the buyer. Like, if you already know that, I think it's good for you to understand what condition your property is prior to you listing it. And I often suggest that sellers get their own property inspection. Depending on where you live, will cost you $250 to $500. But get your own property inspection. Hell, even get your own appraisal. Find out like what the buyer is going to see when they do it themselves. Because too many times we wait until we get into escrow. We wait for the buyer to do their inspection. We wait for the appraisal to come through, only to find out at week 3, hey, this is actually not a transaction that's going to work for the buyer. Now we've got to go back to the drawing table and negotiate with them.
I 100% agree. And I think that really does come back to the theme of like, how good does your home look, right? Because it's like, what is the inspector going to find? So, you know, look, at the end of the day, if you have a new construction home, and I'm not saying new construction is the only thing that's being listed. Don't get me wrong. I feel like if the house is in good enough condition, once again, for a family to move into, you have plenty of time, you're looking to get that highest and best offer, and you're willing to work through multiple offers, then an agent's truly a good fit. And as long as you're working with a professional that knows what they're doing, you know, that has experience in this field and can get you exactly what you're looking for. More importantly, I think when working with agents, and I don't know if you'll agree with me on this, but like, I feel like when you're working with an agent, you want to work with someone who's going to tell you what you need to hear versus what you want to hear. Don't get me wrong. Plenty of times, you know, my $800,000 house, I wish it would sell for $2 million, right? And if a realtor told me it would sell for $2 million, I might believe them. So at the end of the day, you're hiring a professional to guide you and get you to the promised land of getting your beautiful home sold. So you really want to work with a professional who's going to tell you what you need to hear versus what you want to hear, because 99% of the time, if you're working with that professional, then what they laid out in front of you at the beginning before you even sign that listing agreement is more than likely what you're going to see transpire all the way till the finish line. True communication, you know, with both you and the agent, working with the professional to get you that highest offer.
There's that representation there with the realtor, but if you choose the wrong one,
that can be a waste of time too. It's just working with a bad realtor who doesn't know what they're doing. And you go, I mean, how many times have we seen that where
so many times
they're listed for 60, 90, 120 days, and we're looking at the home because we've been doing this for a long time, and we're like, that price is absolutely insane. No one's going to buy the home at that price.
I hate to break it to the world here, but I think like the real seasoned and expert realtors know that at the end of the day, real estate really boils down to like 2 things, right? It's location and price. And the buyers determine what your home is worth. What a buyer is willing to pay determines what your home is worth. Not necessarily the home that sold next door, not what you think it's worth. It's what is the buyer willing to pay? What is the highest bidder willing to pay in today's market, depending on the condition and the location, right? But you do have that representation, you know, and like if all those things line up for you and you're not in any type of financial, time distress or physical distress, right? God willing, you're not, then you want to get the highest price, then all means go for it. You know, list it on the market, hold those open houses, hold those showings, maybe spend $5 to $10 grand preparing it, because you really want to be competitive nowadays. Like homes are not, I mean, you know, they're looking better and better every single year.
100%.
So I think that, you know, if you've got all that, you can work with an agent. And that kind of like brings me to my next thing. It's like, well, how, you know, like that representation, you kind of lose that representation when you're working directly with an investor, right? So I mean,
the investor would be the professional that you kind of look towards to kind of help guide you when selling the home. You know, like, and once again, you're paying the agent to get you to the finish line and to represent you and take a lot of that stress off your plate, right? As far as dealing with the open houses, the listings, the negotiations. Really, you're not dealing with much of that. The agent is. And just kind of to recap before we go into how do you find a home buying company. Once again, if you're working with an agent, or when we feel like an agent may be a better fit for a potential seller, if you have a lot of time, if the house is in great condition or livable condition, or the house is very much so
Move-in
presentable,
ready at least.
move-in ready,
Yeah.
and there isn't some sort of distressor in your life that requires you to get the house sold immediately, right? At the end of the day, I like to think of it this way. Like if I know that I need to get something done and I need to get it done immediately, there's probably something that I'm willing to sacrifice to get there faster, right? And a lot of the times when we're talking about homes, and sellers in particular, a lot of the times a seller may not have a nice home, may not have a home that's presentable, may have a home that needs a ton of work, may have a scenario that's requiring them to get out of the house immediately, where they're willing to sacrifice that top dollar price to solve their solution. And that's when working with a home buying company may be a better solution. Now, on the opposite side of the spectrum, if you have a lot of time, house is in great condition, then yeah, you should be going for top dollar. That's when working with an agent may come in handy. But as Molly was gonna say, how the heck do you find these home buying companies, right? How do you, if I want to work with an investor, if I want to work with a We Buy Houses company, how would you find them?
Yes, okay. I love that question. How the heck do you find these We Buy Houses companies, or how do you find a direct buyer to work with? So my first answer would be Google, right? Google is the source to all of our answers. And you'll want to type in keywords like We Buy Houses, Chattanooga, Sell My House Fast for Cash, Chattanooga, or local home buying companies in Chattanooga. So always make it, my biggest tip is always make it area specific, right? Because you kind of want to go with the more local people. And then my favorite place to look is not, I don't typically go right for the search results, right? Because the first few are sponsored ads. I like to go to Google Maps. I like to see who has an office location in the area. I like to see reviews. I like to read their reviews. Also, you know, Yelp pages will pop up, Zillow pages will pop up where you'll get to see real reviews. And most of the time you're going to land on their website, right? And a lot of them, and ours as well, you know, will tell you, hey, we're a local We Buy Houses company and this is kind of what we do, right? So typically you start off filling the form, fill out the form, you know, let them know what your timeline is, what your situation is. The property address is really important if you want to have them start doing the due diligence and finding out, like, you know, being able to do that due diligence to preparing to provide you that offer. Providing the property address is pretty essential. And then most of the time they'll either contact you via email or call, right? If they're, in my opinion, what we do is we call you right away, right? So like if they're on top of their game and they're an active company, they should call you immediately. So I know a lot of, and I'll have sellers tell me, hey, I filled out like 6 forms before you guys called me. I was just on website on Google. And you know, they're just filling out forms, and then you'll start getting them calling you back or emailing you back. And then what happens from there? Like, you get a hold of them, what happens?
So I think, you know, every home buying company operates a little bit different, but for the most part, they kind of all have the same similar process. And I can talk about a little bit about what we at Cash on My Home do and how we treat our sellers. So ideally, whether you find us online, you find us through a YouTube video like this, you find us through a mailer that we might have sent to your house, a phone call you might have gotten, or even through a referral. Whichever way you might have found us, you're probably going to get directed to either speaking to someone over the phone or filling out a form online. Whichever the way it goes, typically what the process for us looks like is it's very personal, or I guess interpersonal, right? So what we like to do is we will contact you immediately via phone call. So we like to reach out to our sellers and really get an idea of what's going on. We like it to call it like our discovery call, right? We ideally want to find out, hey, are we going to be a good fit for you? And are you guys going to be a good fit for us? And what I really mean by that, does our interest align as far as, can we provide a solution that's truly going to solve a problem that you guys may be facing as the sellers, right? So initially, starts with a website form. It starts with a phone call. We have a preliminary call where we'll ask you some very basic questions. You know, what is the basic condition of the property? How long have you guys been there? What are your goals? What are your aspirations? What are your dreams?
Is it tenant occupied?
Is it tenant occupied? How soon do you guys want to move out? If it's tenant occupied, you know, ideally what's going to happen with the tenant? Just kind of very, very situational questions in regards to what you want to see happen along this process, and can we make that work as far as buyers go. Now, typically after the preliminary call, if we feel like we're going to be a good fit for each other, then we'll take the next step and we'll schedule some one-on-one time in person. So we'll either ourselves or one of our representatives will come out to meet you at the house and just get some eyes on it, right? What I tell Molly a lot of the times is when we're buying homes, it's almost like buying a car, right? Like you wouldn't buy a car that you never drove before. And we definitely don't buy homes that we've never seen before. So
and that's a big thing.
It is a big one.
Yeah.
And the reason Molly says it's a big one is because a lot of the times, and I guess this would be one thing that you want to be somewhat wary about, and maybe we do a whole different segment on things to watch out for.
Right, things to look out for.
But why don't you tell them, like, what do you want to be careful of when you're working with maybe a couple home buying groups and you're getting multiple offers from different home buying groups? What is the number one thing that you would say would differentiate an offer from another offer?
I think that, like, for someone who's selling a property, price is always important. Whether you're selling regardless of the situation you're in, I think price matters, right? And so, like, one thing you may have several offers and you're bidding against one another, but like, what are you really looking for, right? And I think, like, the biggest thing is you want to make sure that you're working with a company that they would stand behind their offer, and there's a few key things in that. So, for us, Jonathan said we never buy properties without seeing it. So are they making you an offer without physically seeing the property yet, right? Like, why is that going to be a problem? Once they physically see the property and determine what the damages are and the repairs, because again, we are looking to make a profit. We have to take into account what expenses there are with purchasing the property, because those expenses become our expenses. If I don't know what the property looks like, but I can give you any offer that you want over the phone or via email, but once I get inside and see it, my offer may be completely different. So I think, like, key thing is when you're getting these offers, you may get several initial preliminary offers. Make sure you take them to the finish line or the next step, which is come down and see my property. And photos, and I know there's a lot of companies that do do a FaceTime, and sometimes we'll do that as well. Yeah. And if you're an out-of-state investor, it's more difficult to get access to the property. We have figured out a way to get access into properties, even if you're across the state. But if I were selling my property, I would want to make sure they see it at least once. Otherwise, in that agreement, there's got to be no contingency where they can back out if the repairs are more than they anticipated. Because when you're working with an investor, they're buying it as is. They shouldn't be coming to you later and saying, oh, it's way more than I anticipated. And we see that a lot,
Yeah, I think the big thing is you're looking for consistency. Like if you're gonna make the decision to work off market and work with an investor, the last thing you want to do is start something with someone to only get halfway and it fall apart because of miscommunication or things, or someone not coming to see the house. I think that we see it happen all the time, right? So, don't get me wrong. Like, at the end of the day, you want consistency when you're working with an investor. So you want that investor to stand by their offer. So a lot of the times we may make like a preliminary ballpark offer based on what you've told us and the basic condition of the home and all the questions that we might have asked. We might give you a range, and we typically, for the most part, 99% of the time fall in that range because we've been doing that for a while. But in no way, shape, or form are we going to say, Molly, I can offer you X amount of money for the house. I am firm on that offer without seeing the home. And a lot of companies do that, unfortunately, which is an invitation to negotiations later down the road. And the reason why that can be the reason why that can be troublesome is because you, as the homeowner, if you've made plans for this money, if you have once again goals, aspirations, and dreams of what selling this house is going to do for you, and all of a sudden you get hit with a $50,000, $100,000 reduction 2 weeks into the deal because that's finally when they came out to see it, that can be troublesome. So I think having the investor come out to see the home is extremely important. So going back to, kind of what the process looks like. So you fill out a form, you make a phone call, you get in contact with an investor, they call you, you get a mail or whatever it may be. Typically there's some sort of preliminary call where they're gathering information, getting to know your situation a little bit better. You're getting to know the investor a little bit better and what their process looks like. After the preliminary call, if you feel like this group may be a good fit, or the group feels like, you guys may be a good fit together, typically after that, we're coming out to see the house, or the investor group's coming out to see the house. After they've seen the house, I know for us for sure, we're in the position where we can make an offer. We've seen the house, we know what we're looking at, we know what we're buying, we've test driven the home. At that point, we can make a firm offer. And that's when we get started, right? Once we make the firm offer, as long as it works for the seller, as long as it works for you, as long as it's an offer that's acceptable and you like, and it gives you the flexibility that you need, boom, we have now officially started. And really, that's the hardest part of this whole thing is getting started, right? Working with an investor, I feel like the hardest part is everything that happens up until the point where you sign a purchase agreement with an investor that says, you are buying my home for X amount of dollars.
Well, that's the hardest part for, I think, the seller.
For the seller,
and it's when we get into escrow, that's like where we fought our biggest battles.
Oh, yeah, 100.
Right?
We could do a whole other segment
on
title problems.
Yeah, and so I think, like, you know, once you've, like, so for me, I would make sure that they physically see my property, right? And, like, again, like, we've heard so many sellers are like, hey, someone drove by and they offered me $30,000 more than what you offered me. And our question is, have they seen it yet, right? Do you want to get into bed with someone that you've never met? I wouldn't, right? So I think that, like, once you find your buyer, once you find the company that feels like a good fit for you, and they're going to give you the price that they're looking for, and they stand behind it, you know, they have core values, and they're legit, right? You can even call escrow and title companies and get references. So they claim to be a buyer in the area, you can call the local title company and say, have you worked with Molly and Jonathan, right?
Yeah.
How are they as buyers? Do they close on their transactions or do they not? But once you get to the bottom line, see the property, you agree on a price, now you're opening up escrow. And you're not opening up escrow with a realtor, you're opening up escrow with the buyer. And so typically we will sign, you know, and we can do it in person or we could do it online, right? Like DocuSign and virtual signing purchase agreements is a real thing. You no longer have to be in person to sign papers to sell your property. But once we open up escrow, that's when really everything starts, I think. And where we go to battle, we put on our war gear and we try and fight, right? And if you want to talk about title, because you deal with the titles.
And Molly doesn't mean like fight, like we're going to war for every transaction. What she really means is that sometimes it's not always smooth sailing when you actually go to sell a home. And what I mean by that is title work. So ideally, and this kind of gets into the nitty gritty, but you know, we talked about having that preliminary call, investor coming out to the house, taking a look at the house, you know, being able to formulate what they can offer. Then they present the offer. The offer works, great, we're in business, we would love to work with you, whatever the company may be. And now you've started the process. And typically what the process looks like once you've got into an agreement is going through title and escrow. So what we do is, you know, the second we have a signed agreement, we're typically taking that agreement, sending it over to the escrow company. We will include the seller in those emails.
Introduce
you to the title and escrow company. Make sure that, you know, everybody's in communication because they may need some. It's not that they may need. They will definitely need some additional information from the seller, personal information that they will communicate with you to grab. But when it comes to title, and I think this would probably be a topic for another video, sometimes it's not always smooth sailing, especially when we're dealing with death, probates, and heirs, when we're dealing with messy title that may have not been cleared. There's a lot of things that may pop up. Now, look, this is maybe 10 to 15% of the population out there who own homes. A lot of the times it's smooth sailing all the way to the closing table. And what I mean by that is once we signed an agreement and we have it escrowed at the title company, all we're waiting for is a title search. Once that title search comes back clear, typically we're closing about a week to a week and a half later. So really the transaction, a good smooth transaction with no title issues, from signing the paperwork till closing takes anywhere between 3 weeks to a month. Sometimes it's even faster. So that would be a smooth transaction.
Yeah.
Don't get me wrong. Sometimes we have not so smooth transactions that take a lot longer to close because we have to work through whatever is causing title to be encumbered. And a lot of the times we take on that responsibility as the investors, right? When you're working with an investor, you're looking to a professional to be able to help you navigate some of these waters. So there have been a lot of the times where we've worked with sellers who have tried to sell one of their homes.
Yeah.
They've gotten all the way to the finish line to find out that they can't sell it for whatever reason may be.
Absolutely.
And the title company gives us a call and says, Jonathan and Molly, we're in for a sticky one, and this is what needs to be done. And sometimes sellers don't have the right guidance on what it takes to actually clear the title. I personally, I think you know, I love doing this. It's like one of my, I don't know why, I just love getting into messy title and solving problems.
Yeah, you're weird.
But that's where we're able to help homeowners who may have tried to sell a home before but can't, and they come across people like me and Molly who've been doing this for a while, who know how to navigate these issues to where we can get to the finish line. So I guess moral of the story is, clean transactions, 3 weeks to a month. Sometimes when we run into messy title issues that can present problems, it can take a little bit longer. But I think the most important thing that you can count on as the seller is if you're working with a professional, you're in good hands who can help you navigate those waters.
And just responsibilities as a seller, like your responsibilities would be communicating with escrow, signing the opening documents, right? The opening escrow documents. And with mobile notaries, like regardless of where you live, a notary can be sent out to your location to sign that. Really during escrow, like the buyer should be in touch with you, I think once a week.
Yeah.
Letting you know,
what's going on.
Keeping you informed. Hey, title's come back, title's clear, we're dealing with this issues, et cetera, et cetera. If title's clear, you can close sooner. Title typically takes about 7 to 8 days to come back.
Yeah.
And really fully, after it comes off the examiner's office or their table where they can really open up the full title and see exactly what's going on with the property. And then let's just say everything goes well, or you deal with that situation. During escrow, you'd be responsible just getting escrow the documents they need. If there's any payoff agreements, any loan agreements, any lease agreements we may need, that would be your responsibility. And then coming to the closing table and closing your check. Like, once again, you're not cleaning up the house. You don't have to deal with the tenants, unless like there's a specific situation where we are dealing with the tenants with you. But typically it's like, you show up to opening and you show up to closing, and the way that you can get your money is either bank wire, walk away with a check right there and then,
and I think when it comes to that's another thing that gets handled typically when you're working with an investor or a home buying company. Tenants, that's something that also gets managed throughout the escrow process, whether we're doing tenant handoff, introducing your tenants to the new owners, whether it's the home buying company or it's a company like ours. Making sure that the tenants are taken care of, they're aware of what's going on, so on and so forth. So all of that gets handled through the transaction. I think the biggest thing that you as the homeowner should be prepared for is that this should be one of the easiest transactions that you've done till date. Like literally, and we have sellers tell us all the time, and it's not to toot our own horn of how good we are. But a lot of the times, I'll get on the phone after we close a deal with the seller, and I'll say, "Hey, Molly, was this as easy as I told you it was going to be?" So I couldn't imagine it being any easier. And that's truly what it should be like working with an off-market buyer. It should be a smooth, easy transaction because you're not going through those traditional channels of, once again, having to list it, open houses, clean the house out, make sure you guys are out of the house, getting the house perfect so it sells for top dollar, so on and so forth. You're sacrificing that to be able to have an easy, smooth transaction.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more with you. So I think, we've covered a ton of topics. Like, really, we wanted to just give you insight on what is a We Buy Houses company? What's a direct home buyer look like? We wanted to answer the questions that may be lingering in your mind, right? Because I think there's a lot of hesitation and there's a lot of, stigmatism around with these types of companies. And don't get me wrong, there are some bad ones out there. Again, like, make sure that they're seeing the property, review the contract with an attorney if that makes you feel more comfortable, get real reviews from people who they've closed deals with, title companies, escrow companies, other local attorneys, call and see if they know of these people, right? Like, make sure you're working with the best company, okay? It's your best interest, it's your property. Even if you're in a situation where you need to sell it for less or you need to sell it fast, it shouldn't matter. You should still always get the best representation possible. I don't think working with the We Buy Houses company means that you let go of your values, right, for the home. So I think to kind of wrap it up, I hope this was helpful for you. I hope this was insightful for you. Thank you guys so much for tuning in. My name is Molly.
And I'm Jonathan.
And we hope you guys found this video helpful. We want to provide you a video once a week discovering all types of topics related to selling your house. With over 350 homes bought since 2017, we hope that we can provide some real life experience and provide some value in your life when it comes to selling your own home.
Yeah, and please, if you got any value out of this video whatsoever, out of any of the videos you may have watched, make sure you hit the subscribe button and hit the bell notification as well so you get notified anytime we put out some new content. And if there's anything that maybe you're tackling or any questions that you may have, or maybe just some content that you'd like to see down the road, please leave a comment below.
We'll see you in the next video.
Take care.